All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. YouTube. This has been a long time coming. I am Tamara Johnson Shealy. And tonight, we're going to be talking part one, Indoctrinated, the Democratic Party, and the Black Church. It's a conversation that needs to be had because we are in the midst of this United States Senate runoff. And so few people, we need to have a conversation. And I wrote a blog. And for those of you that haven't read my blog, I will actually read my blog because I want people to understand. Actually, I wrote two blogs. I see you guys are coming in. I see you coming in. Make sure you share this. Yes, ma'am. Yes, leading by example. I'm not sure if you're a man or a woman, but yes, leading by example. I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion too. It's a conversation that we absolutely have to have. But I'm going to start with the first blog that I wrote that sparked all of this. Raphael Warnock, we will withhold the vote. Raphael Warnock, I was hopeful that you would do the right thing. I did not want to write this. I did not want to fight to make you address reparations. I did not want to fight to demand that you have a specific Black agenda, but you, sir, have given me no choice. How dare you stand in the pulpit of Dr. King and not have a plan for Black people? How dare you use the church, the most sacred institution of the Black community, and the legacy of Ebenezer Baptist Church for your own personal political gain? I don't have to tell you the plight of Black America. You know it, as it is evident right outside the doors of Ebenezer with the number of homeless Black people in Atlanta's gentrified communities. Raphael Warnock, we will not play politics with you, and nor will we play politics with the lives of Black people. You are now in a position, and you have chosen not to address reparations for the descendants of American chattel slavery, and you have chosen not to have a specific Black agenda. Therefore, Raphael Warnock, we will withhold the vote. I have made a lot of people mad with this. I wrote a second blog because there's something along the way on the campaign trail that I noticed that was, evident every time I approached a Black person. A lot, I would get the question, are you a Democrat? Are you a Democrat? And I noticed on the campaign trail the power the Democratic Party in that D had on our psyche as a people. And that wasn't, it would have made sense if the first thing that someone asked me was about where I stand on the policies, on certain issues. It would have made sense if I could have had that kind of exchange first. But the first thing that I was asked on the campaign trail by Black people, are you a Democrat? Are you a Democrat? As if that was the key to having even a further conversation. I actually asked this question of another candidate in my race who ran as an independent. I asked him, Black man, how was it for you running as an independent and being Black? He said it was hard because Black people couldn't understand what it means to be independent, because he wasn't running as a Democrat, had a good platform, but because he ran as an independent and not as a Democrat, he wasn't well received and didn't fare very well in this race, in our race. the stronghold of the Democratic Party. So I wrote a second blog, and I titled this blog, Scared Black Folks, the Indoctrination of the Democratic Party and the Black Church. Because I also noticed the power of how the pastors were able to control their flock. It's whatever the pastor say. What does pastor say? So between the stronghold of the Democratic Party and the stronghold of the Black church, we're stuck somewhere in our thinking. So I wanted to have this conversation tonight. I'm gonna read my second blog to you. Scared Black Folks, the Indoctrination of the Democratic Party and the Black Church. I have scared and infuriated the Democratic Party with Withhold the Vote, a movement that signals to Black voters to withhold their votes to elected officials and candidates who do not have a specific agenda or a plan for reparations. I have scared and infuriated Black folks for challenging the Black pastor and Democratic candidate for the United States Senate, Reverend Raphael Warnock, for not having a specific Black agenda or a plan for reparations. From the behavior of Black Democrats, it proves the stronghold the Democratic Party and the Black church has on Black folks. Black folks are doubly confused. I keep getting asked the question, if we don't vote, what are we supposed to do? The thought of not voting Democrat and the thought for some of not voting for a pastor scares the heck out of them. Most Black folks have been taught to vote Democrat with no critical thinking about where the candidate stands on the issues. Most Black folks have such a reverence for the Black church and the Black pastor that whatever the pastor says goes. Black folks still have a slave mentality, whether we want to admit it or not. However, Black folks, now is our time to think critically about the candidates to whom we give our votes. Now is our time, Black folks, to think critically about the role the Black church should be playing in our communities. Now is our time, Black folks, to free the chains of our thinking and remove the fear from our hearts. Let's do what our ancestors did when they came out of slavery, and let's move into Reconstruction. We have to recognize that something is happening in our thinking, that we can go to the polls and just vote blue no matter who, when there's no specific agenda for us. And the data shows that by 2053, we Black folks will be a permanent bottom caste in this country. We will have zero net wealth. We are on a race to the bottom. And people are mad at me for telling the truth about Raphael Warnock. How can you be mad at the hand that is trying to feed you? We cannot go to the polls and not demand that he has an agenda specific to us as a people. Specific to us. Standing in the shoes of Dr. King. Standing on that legacy. Dr. King died for us. We don't demand anything. We did not choose Raphael Warnock. The Democratic Party chose Raphael Warnock. You know why? Because he can be manipulated and controlled. I said it. Please run tell that. They put millions and millions of dollars behind him. Millions of dollars is behind him. Guess who he owes first? Where that money came from, he owes that back first. He doesn't owe it to you. In the last 3 weeks, I have interviewed candidates from my race, from this race. None of us have been contacted by the party, independents or Democrats. The Republican candidate even said the same thing, that she hadn't even been contacted by her party. Let me tell you guys why. Because the higher up the food chain you go politically, it's the same power source. They're controlling the Democrats. They're controlling the Republicans. So it doesn't matter who wins. They don't need our votes. They're going to control one of them. And they're controlling both of them. So I'm angered and I'm disappointed. But I have to get angry. If anybody knows me, I have to get angry because I'm a nice person. I come from the beauty and barber industry, right? Where my job was to make you look good and feel good. And I love to laugh. I love to smile. I'm a happy person, but I've had to get angry to do this work. Withhold the vote is holding our candidates and elected officials accountable to Black people. To Black people. It is not saying do not vote. You can go and you can write in, you can skip races, do whatever you need to do to show them that if they don't have an agenda specific to you, let the chips fall where they may, because they obviously don't need you. Now is our time to use our political power. The only power Black people have is the money in our pocket and the vote. You don't just go and spend your money anywhere. I'm sure you're very specific about who gets that dollar. Because if somebody don't treat you right, I can't imagine you keep going back. That doesn't make any sense. And I know you don't. So why the hell do we keep running and falling for this every election cycle? It is proven that if we don't do something radically different, we ain't gonna make it. So tonight I wanted to talk about the indoctrination, because I think if we understood the history, and these opinions are mine. So my guest, these are not his opinions, but I invited him because I wanted him to come and give us history, because we don't know who we were and who we are and what we're capable of doing. Because change has to happen, and change has to happen right now. We need reparations right now. Right now. So this is not the person that I am on Saturdays. So you're going to get something very different from me on Tuesdays and Thursday evenings, 7 p.m. Eastern. You're going to get something very different from me. Again, these are my opinions and not the opinions of any of my guests, because I don't want to scare anybody off. So I was going to take the first 15 minutes just to kind of give you that bit of information, that we did not elect Raphael Warnock. He was selected and he was forced down our throats. He owes himself back to the big donors. He doesn't owe himself to us. He hasn't changed his tune from the beginning. And now that he's in the runoff, he still hadn't. It's reparations now. So I'm going to bring in my guest, Mr. Robert Thomas, because we're going to talk history. He's a historian here in Atlanta. And I want to welcome him this evening. Hey, Robert.
Hey, Tara, how you doing?
Good, sir. How are you? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Introduce yourself. You're Robert Thomas, historian. Incite cultural tourism.
Okay, yeah, I'm a historian. My name is Robert Thompson, and I have a company called Insight Cultural Tourism, and we do things like this. We work on historical projects. We're currently working with with a professor from Spelman College, Julie Johnson, in a project called Idle Crimes and Heavy Work, which explores the plight of African American women during the convict labor era. And we're also working with Transformation Alliance to develop Southwest Atlanta as a cultural destination. There are a number of important cultural, historical sites that are relevant to African American people. And tourism is one of the number one issues, number one money makers in Atlanta. So, in reference to what Tamara was saying about where our power lies in the vote and economics, and so I thought I might have some inputs on this. As Tamara says, what I'm here to do is try to talk about the history of how we got to this point. I don't think that we can come up with any kind of solutions that are going to be meaningful unless we know how we got here.
Mm-hmm.
So today, I just want to talk about how we got to this point, and then later on, we can talk about how we move forward. Um, the history of African Americans and the church is, as it's sometimes stated on Facebook, is complicated. Um, and there are sort of several seminal points in history I'd like to bring up to sort of illustrate that point, and again to show us how we got here. If I had to grade the Christian church on how its relevance to civil rights, human rights has been over the history of this country, I'm afraid I'd have to give it a D. We have to remember that the Christian church, unfortunately, approved of slavery. And the Pope, back in the 16th century, divided the slave, will you say, market between Spain and Portugal. And it was an approved practice by the church for hundreds of years. So that's the first instance. The second instance is in the mid 19th century with the formation of Southern Baptists. Southern Baptists were formed as a breakaway section of the Baptist Convention over the issue of slavery. So you have the Northern Baptists rejecting slavery, or not even actually rejecting slavery, refusing to actually take a position on it. And the Southern Baptists blatantly approving of slavery, as they say, through scripture. And it led to a break. And then in around 1978, a faction of there was a turmoil in the Southern Baptist movement, and I use Southern Baptist because it's one of the largest. It is the largest Protestant denomination in the country, and so I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but like I said, the relationship between the church and African Americans' quest for civil rights has been spotty at best. So we throw into that mix politics. And so another important, I think, point of departure that we have to understand is that prior to the 1960s, most Black people were Republicans. The South was solidly Democratic, at white supremacist segregationists, people like George Wallace and Strom Thurmond ruled the party. And a lot of historians said that we actually regressed from the era of Reconstruction and slavery because prior to the freeing of enslaved African Americans, the South was allowed to count slaves in their proportionment for representatives in Congress. It was called the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. So Southern states or any state that had slaves could count those slaves in order to determine their representation in Congress. And that was a founding principle of the United States until the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. So after that point, because of the failure of the federal government to enforce the voting rights, the amendment that gave African American people the right to vote, Black people were systematically excluded, one, from the Democratic Party, and two, they were discouraged both legally, economically, and even physically from voting, period. So now you could count all Black people as full participants in allotting representatives, but they still didn't have to vote in all practical applications of that, because they were prevented to vote. If you vote, you lose your job, you could get killed. There were grandfather clauses, poll taxes, you name it. It was voter suppression, which is not too different from the types that the methods have changed, but the end result of trying to suppress the Black vote has been going on since Black people got to vote. And it continues to this day. Now they use voter roll purges, moving, voter ID, making it difficult to get voter ID. I remember when they initiated voter ID in Georgia, and then they moved the motor vehicle department. It used to be across the street from the stadium, and they moved it. Blatant attempt to make it more difficult for Black people to register and vote. So this is an ongoing history. It becomes difficult when we look at Black people find themselves now between a rock and a hard place. I think, Tamara and I have different opinions on how we can achieve some kind of economic, social justice in this community, but I don't think there's any argument that it's due. The question is what's the best way to do it? And we're in a difficult place because of the system of elections that we have. In other words, if we don't find someone that has backs the entire program that we want, we don't have very much of an alternative. We're in basically what would be considered a monopoly of two parties, Republicans and Democrats. And it's almost all the times we find ourselves voting for the lesser of two evils. So, I just wanted to tell you how we got here. The way that the electoral system is set up, we wind up with a system where we have two minority parties. At best, Democrats, registered Democrats are about 30% of the population. Registered Republicans are about roughly 29% of the population, a little less, but it's basically broken down into thirds. And then you have a third of the population, the largest segment, are independents. But if you ask yourself, when's the last time an independent won any kind of election? It's because the system is set up to keep these two parties in power. And so until there are efforts now, and I think all people, not just Black people, realized how anti-democratic that process is. And so there are people who are moving towards a more open system. Ranked choice voting is one of the methods that are being discussed. In fact, I think there's at least one state that does ranked choice voting, and I think it was on the ballot in about 3 or 4 other states. I'm not sure what.
So before we go into like that part of it, before we go to that part of it, let's come back to the history and really focus in. I made some notes about the Southern Baptists and the Northern Baptists. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
It's a schism that still exists to this day. The religion has seemed to instead of I think one of the problems is that we allow politics to override our religious thought. Just think that so automatically Democrats feel the same way when the two parties have flipped completely in my lifetime. As I said before, when I first became aware of politics back in the 60s, most Black people were Republicans. It wasn't until the election of Robert Kennedy and Johnson that Black people began to switch, and particularly in the South, to Democrats. In 1973, a guy named I forget his name, but he came up. He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee, and he made a plan. He developed a plan which was called the Southern Strategy. Mm-hmm. And it was during the election of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, a Republican, launched his campaign in the South with a speech about criticizing busing. And from that point on, the South became pretty much Republican, where now most of the states in the South have Republican legislatures and Republican governors. And that process started back in the 70s with the Southern Strategy. It was a purposeful strategy to basically take advantage of and to exacerbate the tensions between poor whites and poor Blacks over busing and segregation. And so that's how we got to this point in terms of today's politics. I don't think
to the 60s. Before you go into the 70s, go back a little bit to the 60s, and you talk about Kennedy and Johnson during that time.
Kennedy, the turning point for Kennedy was when Martin Luther King was arrested, I think, in Albany, Georgia. And he had his brother, Robert Kennedy, write to the governor of Alabama, basically, was it Georgia? I think it was Georgia. So I think he was in, I forget what state it was, but he was in a Southern jail and there were fears for his life. And President Kennedy had his brother, who was the Attorney General at the time, Robert Kennedy, call the governor and basically say to him that I'm making you responsible for his safety, that if anything happens to him, we're blaming you for it, and he did it publicly. And so that was the first overt really move on a national level by national Democrats to recruit Black people.
But so let me ask you a question. Is it because they didn't want the blood on their hands? Do you think it wasn't that they really cared about his safety? They didn't want the blood of this man on their hands. If something
I think it was a recognition of the emerging power of Black voters. It was during the Civil Rights Movement where Blacks were were registering in huge numbers in the South. Mm-hmm. And it was a cold like all politics, it was a cold calculated effort that we can now capture this large segment of new voters.
So basically, it was a chess move. Like, we're going to make sure this man is safe, and we're going to quote unquote make sure he's protected. We don't want nothing to happen to him, as a signal to Black voters and Black people that, you know, we're with you, and that is where the mindset started to shift, where we're leaning Democrat because of him.
Yeah, that was the first overt national act that signaled to Black people that maybe you had a home in the Democratic Party. And it incensed white Southerners who were primarily Democrats in the same party as Kennedy, and they started leaving the party in droves. And from that point on, and particularly with, like, again, with the Southern strategy, it exacerbated the switch. In my lifetime, and I would say over the last 50 years, the two parties have totally flipped. From the Republican Party being the champion of civil rights, and you have to remember that it was Eisenhower who sent the troops to Little Rock, okay, back in the 50s.
And Eisenhower was a Republican, correct?
Yes, he was a Republican president, okay. And then in the term of one, a span of 4 or 5 years, because of the efforts of civil rights workers in the South to register Black people to vote, the Democratic Party made their own Southern strategy, if you will, by signaling to Black folks that they had a home in the Democratic Party. You have to remember that the Democrat, again, the parties in America were split regionally. There was a strong Democratic Party in the North prior to the Civil War, but it was mostly white recent immigrants, mostly Irish, particularly in New York. In fact, during the Civil War, New York almost seceded from the Union. A lot of people don't know that, because slavery and its main byproduct, cotton, was the #1 export of the United States. Cotton was to the 18th century what oil was to the 20th century. And America was the largest producer of cotton. And the financing behind it was through New York and through the New York Stock Exchange. What people don't realize is that the first mortgage-backed securities were mortgages on slaves. And that's how Southerners raised money. They mortgaged their slaves to buy land to plant more crops. And so let's stay there with that. Before you run trading in slave stocks.
Before you run past that, let's say that again. That we were mortgaged. We were used as
collateral for loans. Yes. And not just in New York, but all over the world. The London Stock Exchange, Amsterdam Stock Exchange. There's a really great book called Half the Truth Has Never Been Told by a guy named Edward Baptiste, which goes into it in much more detail. Slavery was not just a Southern phenomenon. The largest slave fleet in the United States sailed out of Rhode Island. Most of the financial backing of the slave trade, in terms of insurance, in terms of investment, came from Northern bankers. And of course, they bought most of the mills that refined the cotton were in the North. So this was not a Southern phenomenon. Slavery was a national economic engine for this country. Another major incident was the election of Rutherford Hayes, the election of 1876, I do believe. And that's what ended Reconstruction. a lot of people don't understand or know about what Reconstruction is. After the Civil War, many of the Southerners who have participated in the Civil War were disenfranchised, and they could not vote or hold office until they pledged allegiance to the United States government and accepted the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And because a lot of them initially wouldn't do it, um, the black vote was the vote, pretty much. And in fact, what people don't realize is that in certain states like Mississippi and Alabama, black slaves outnumbered free whites right before and right after the Civil War. That's why the violence in those states, because the only way they could control those states was not politically. They couldn't control it politically anymore because they didn't have the numbers, was violence. And that's why one of the reasons why those states had such a violent history of repression up until very recently, up until the mid 20th century. So what happened in the election of 1876 was that Rutherford Hayes, and this is when the first sellout of Black people after their emancipation. In 1876, there was a disputed election, very much like this one, very close. And in fact, Tilden, who was the Democratic opponent to Hayes, actually won the popular vote. But for whatever reason, and I'm still trying to figure this out, the election was thrown into, because if there's not as we know, we don't vote for the president directly. We vote for electors who then vote for the president. Mm-hmm. So back at that time, a number of states were able to withhold their electors until Rutherford Hayes made a deal that would remove the troops from the South and thereby ending Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, there were Black governors, Black senators, Black congressmen, and all of that ended with the election of Rutherford Hayes and the removal of Union troops from the South. And that's when this reign of terror, is what I called it, descended upon the South primarily, but across the country, with lynchings, Black codes, and basically a disenfranchisement en masse of Black people, and which was not remedied for at least 100 years, not until the civil rights movement of the 60s did the United States honor its obligations under the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Even there was a quasi-slavery system called the convict leasing system. Another great book by a guy named Blackman, I think it's Douglas Blackman, wrote Slavery by Another Name, where tens of thousands of Black people were arrested on charges such as vagrancy, and then sold by the state to businesses. And it was particularly rampant here in Georgia. One of the worst, all I can say is forced labor camps in America was right here in Georgia and Atlanta, a place called Chattahoochee Brick, where thousands of Black people were forced to work in deplorable conditions because they couldn't pay their fines, which might have been $5 or $10, but if you don't have a job, you can't. And then they would be sentenced to years working in mines, turpentine mills, brick factories. In fact, most of Atlanta was rebuilt with convict labor. Back in some of the more prominent people, James English, who was the mayor, and the police commissioner, interesting combinations of choice, and also was the largest employer of convict labor. I mean, what does it say when the police commissioner of the city of Atlanta is the biggest employer of convict labor. So these are the things that we have to deal with and have made us, like I said, between a rock and a hard place. Um, um, I understand there are a lot of people in this country who need reparations. I mean, one of the main ingredients that are left out of this equation, and I understand you have to follow your constituency, and I understand that.
Black people need reparations, Robert, not just a lot of people. We, those of us who are descendants of chattel slavery in this country, we are owed reparations.
Yeah, but so are Native Americans. Without the land, there would be no slavery.
I understand, Robert. We're going to stick and stay on the topic.
We
don't want to take the audience question.
I don't think that you can have an individual solution to the problem. You have to have a comprehensive.
Robert, we're dealing with a lot of people here tonight who want to hear specifically about their issues. So we ain't going to go to the Native Americans. I don't think I have any Native Americans on this broadcast. I'm pretty sure I don't.
Okay, I mean, like I said, everybody has to. People look out for their constituencies, and I understand that. And we can say that there are no. That doesn't make the issue go away.
Well, it doesn't, and we're not trying to solve everybody's issues. We're trying to solve tonight's broadcast. Robert is about the indoctrination of the Democratic Party and the Black church. So I want us to stay there. I know my audience. I know my audience, and trust me, the chat might go crazy, and I don't want them to go crazy.
Okay. Well, I think that you can't. Well,
there it is. A lot of us don't want to talk about Native Americans. They don't. So we're gonna stick and stay with the folks who. It's like you have an audience. You're speaking to your audience, Robert. So Fannie Lou Hamer, that's somebody that I know enough about her to know that she wanted to, she fought for us and our right to vote. And I feel like a side of me is, doing her some justice, because, this right to vote is sacred. I don't take anything away from our right to vote. People, how they try to make you feel guilty or try to shame you into voting. This right to vote, people died and bled for you to have this right to vote. I agree, and I humbly respect it. I get it. However, 50-some, 60-some years later, we now have to be more strategic. We got to be more strategic with this vote, and we got to use it as the weapon that it is, because is being used against us because we're not politically engaged enough. We don't know who these candidates are. We're not holding them accountable.
Well, I guess it's like I said, it's a strategic move, because we are only faced with two real choices, and we either can vote for Warnock or we can vote for the Democrat or the Republican. And if we don't vote, what does that mean? And what's the
It means that we sent a signal. It means that we send a signal that we will not be taken for granted, that you will not get this vote for nothing. You will not get this vote for free. And then guess what? Somebody, Democrat or Republican, I love what Ice Cube is doing right now. I love the fact that Ice Cube is like, look at here. I have a contract for Black America. Who wanna, let's have a conversation. Democrat, Republican, you're all two birds of the two wings of the same bird, two sides of the same coin. You're the same people. Who want to have a conversation? Let's see who wants to work with us as a people. And that's where we are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's all about the agenda. I stick and stay on the message. People try to make this personal to me, this withhold the vote, because I've done this before. And I point specifically at candidates and elected officials. This ain't new. I'm not telling people not to vote. I'm telling you to withhold the vote from those that do not have a Black agenda and for those who do not have a plan for reparations. It's very targeted and it's very specific. And people don't want to be held accountable to that extent. That is why I'm getting the backlash. So before you and I go on the tangent, because I do want to read some of the comments, because I like I said, the audience that's here tonight, I know. I'm telling you, let's see what they have to say.
It's a difficult political situation.
Yeah, let's talk about. Look, let's talk about ADOS. Those of us who are descendants of slavery in this country. That's what they want to talk about. I'm telling you, that's your audience tonight. Native Americans have modes of representation. Blacks largely don't. They get.
I don't agree with you. I don't disagree with you that that's what they're talking about. But you can't talk about political change in a multicultural society by only dealing with one side of the issue. You can't.
Robert,
it's not enough of us.
But you know what? This is where we have to have allies. I'm clear. We have to have allies. So I reach. I do a broadcast every Saturday with a white dude, old white man that you would think, how do y'all even come together? Because he understands that for things to be better in this nation, we're gonna have to fix the problems and address Black America. We have to have allies. We cannot do this alone. I agree. It was the Republicans who offered 40 acres and a mule to free Black people. No Indian info, please. And he smiles. Native Americans have treaties, whatever else they may be owed. ADOS has gotten nothing. And he says exactly, Mommy Love. Blacks don't have a problem with alliances, but it has to be mutually beneficial. Native Americans just got a huge land allotment in Oklahoma. Exactly. So this is your audience, Robert. Black people started leaning toward the Democratic Party with the election of Roosevelt D. Franklin in the 1930s during the Depression. Do you agree with that?
I'm quiet. I didn't hear what you said about.
Black people started leaning toward the Democratic Party with the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1930s during the Depression. Do you agree with that?
I think it started. I think it with Roosevelt, and not so much particularly because of Roosevelt, but because of his wife Eleanor, who was a lot more vocal on social issues than her husband was. But it started there, but I don't think it was significant until the 60s.
She says Native Americans must take up their grievances with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Teach, Tamara. The guest is very informative historically. Yes, you know your stuff, don't you, Robert?
I try.
Can you still not see me? Because I think you were saying you still can't see me on your
camera. I have this thing that says share screen in front of me, and I don't know how to get rid of it where I can see you.
No, we don't want you to share your screen.
Yeah, it says it says share your screen, and like I said, I don't want to hit the wrong thing and lose you altogether. Now I can see you. I mean, I can hear you, but I can't see you. I can't see the comments.
You have people like Jimmy Dore trending for demanding AOC to withhold her vote for the House seat against Pelosi. So I haven't been following what's going on with AOC and Pelosi. All right, she says, come on. He said it was Republicans who helped push the 1964 Civil Rights Act despite Democrats filibustering. Is that true, Robert?
I have to say what I think, and what I don't think that it's really hard to achieve a political solution under our current system of choosing leaders. The system is rigged towards the Republican and Democratic Party. We can only, as you say, this election is a perfect example. Biden would not be the Democratic nominee if it wasn't for Black people. Okay, so now that he is the matter of fact, he's the president elect and will be the president. Now we're into a bargaining we're in a bargaining position, and I guess that's why
Stay there.
Harris got to
Stay
be
there.
vice president. But
Stay
the
there.
question then becomes is how far do you? And this is an individual subjective decision that each voter has to make. Is how far do you want to push it?
Let me tell
And
you
what would
something.
be the results of a Republican controlled? Because if we vote for somebody else, then we're going to get a Republican controlled Senate. And
Okay, stay there, Robert. Back up. The time to negotiate is not when the deal is done. Like I said, the time to negotiate is not when the deal is done. Like he's in office. Joe Biden is our president. Now y'all want to negotiate with Joe? That's not when we should have had this negotiation, everything we wanted on the table. You got black leaders now, quote unquote, black leaders now begging Joe Biden to do something. This is what we want. This is what we want. This ain't the time and Joe giving them the blues. Joe talking down to him, condescending. He just talking down to him. Joe giving them the blues. We don't have you want to talk about what you want after you done got this man elected. He don't owe you nothing. He didn't promise you nothing before he got there. So you think he gonna do something now? And they looking real foolish.
Well, I mean, we had a choice. We could have backed Biden or we could have backed Bernie Sanders. And we made a decision. And I think, in my particular opinion, I thought Bernie Sanders had a better strategy for achieving some kind of economic, social justice in this country. And again, like I say, it's a subjective. That's what the black leaders can only tell. Clyburn is not a pastor. Okay, Clyburn is a political operative, and he was the one that orchestrated Biden's win in South Carolina. Okay, and he made that subjective decision that he could hold Biden's feet to the fire. Now,
and
people like yourself saying that we didn't get enough for that deal. Okay. But there's not too much you can do. There's not too much you can do about. You're right. There's not too much you can do about it after the election.
I guess fundamentally, we've been bamboozled, Robert. We've been bamboozled.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing with that. We have been, and that's because of the system that we're in. We're between a rock and a hard place.
They played us, Robert. They played us, and got played.
I'm not arguing with that.
To be played, and now they're saying, "Go vote for Warnock. Go vote and be played again." We just keep getting played and keep getting played. When does it stop?
When we change the system of how people are elected.
We can't change this system. We can influence it. We can't change it.
We can't. No, we can't. We've changed a lot more things fundamentally than this, like the emancipation, of slavery. That was a much heavier push. And I think that like I said, there are things that are that ideas that all people of goodwill can come to that make it a more just system. In terms of how do we proceed from the system, the system is rigged. The system is rigged towards either you can vote for Republicans or you can vote for Democrats.
Say that if you know the system is rigged, you know the game, you know the system is rigged, you got to do something different. You can't play it like they expect you to play it. You know it's rigged. You know it's rigged. So guess what? You got to go in and play that thing very differently. So withhold the vote is a strong strategy. It sends a message. Democrats, you want this vote? You're going to give me something in exchange for
it. Like I said, it's subjective. It's a subjective strategy with. What would be the results of that? What would be the results?
It's gonna be. You know what the results gonna be? They're gonna be like the Democrats are gonna say, "Guess we lost. We lost. So we can't play with these black voters no more. We can't, you got to show people that you can't play with me. You can't play with me. You got to show them. So
Well, that assumes
the
that you're dealing with rational people,
okay,
which you're
but
not.
guess what? This race is run again in 2 years. We gave you the presidency. We gave you the presidency. Donald Trump done showed you, President Biden, how to go in there if you got the right executive orders, and that's what those leaders were asking him to do. Executive orders, do something. He has the whole presidency. If he doesn't get the House, it still ain't gonna hurt him. We still got the power, quote unquote. We got 2 years here, and this race has to be run again here in Georgia. Let's send a signal to the Democratic Party. You better give us something in exchange for this vote, or else you're gonna lose. Because Black people don't have nothing to lose. We're on a race to the bottom.
I'm not sure we don't have anything to lose, but it's like I said, it's a subjective strategy.
You might have a little something to lose. Your generation, the older generation, y'all have a little something to lose. They gave y'all a little something, and y'all so pacified. Your generation, not you specifically, your generation is so pacified because you getting Social Security. My generation, we might not have no damn Social Security. You know, we can't stay on a job. Jobs don't even, you grow up, your generation were able to go and get a job and stay on that job 10, 15, 20 years. That ain't an option for my generation.
And what I'm suggesting is a much more revolutionary strategy. I mean, just tinkering with the vote is not going to get it.
It's going to send a message to the Democratic Party because this is our party. It sends a message to the Democratic Party. You don't play with us. You don't take us for granted. You want our support. You're going to give us something in exchange for it.
And what they say to us is, what they say to us is,
they won't.
The country is evenly divided, pretty much evenly divided in terms of, as we can see from this last election. And basically, you know, we're playing a game of chicken. Okay. And that game of chicken is who's going to blink first. And that is the Democratic Party going to blink first and say, oh, we need these Black people to stay in power? Or are Black people going to blink first and say, well, if we don't vote for the Democrats, then we're going to wind up with people like Trump? So
Trump was not the worst thing. I am not a Trump supporter, so don't please nobody get this twisted. But Trump was not the worst thing that happened to Black people.
Not in our life, not in the history of this country, but most recently it is.
We've had 400 years of Donald Trump's and worse. We've survived this. So that fear tactic, it ain't working for me. I ain't scared. And generations behind me, we ain't never scared.
Well, I think we need a more radical solution than just withholding the vote.
What is that?
We need a more radical solution.
What would that be?
Eliminating elections as a process of selecting our legislators.
Well, we're going to let you start that movement. We have about a minute and a half left. I want to say thank you, Robert, for this spirited conversation. I knew that, you know, I know how brilliant you are. You know your history, you know your stuff. We got a long way to go as a people. We got a lot of work to do. I want to thank y'all for joining me tonight. I'm going to continue this conversation, Indoctrinated, the Democratic Party and the Black church, because along the way, between the stronghold that the Democratic Party has on us as a people and the stronghold that the Black church has on us, we are stuck in our thinking and we are afraid to not vote. And that's something deep and it's something psychological. It's something going on in our spirit and our psyche. It's something going on that's deep-seated and deep-rooted. We can't even think. The thought of not voting scares the hell out of us.
Well, I like I said, I don't think electing officials will ever solve the problem. We have to have another system of selecting people, the same way we select juries.
Yeah. But in the meantime, this is all we got today, Robert, is that we have the two forms of currency as Black people. We got the money in our pocket and we spend it wisely. We ain't going someplace over and over again where somebody don't treat us right. So we spend our money wisely. I'm saying that let's do the same thing with that vote, the other form of currency.
Well, there's one
spend
way
it
to find out if it works, and that's to do it, and then we'll see what happens. A lot of times,
on that note, Robert, we're at the top of the hour. You coming back Thursday? You coming back Thursday? He says, looking forward to Thursday. We have nothing to lose but our chains. And on that note, brother.
All right. Take care, dear.
See you on Thursday.
All right.
Good night, everybody. See you on Thursday.